2 in the video series. We're going over what it took to put a 5.2 liter V8 in this Jeep. If you didn't see the first video, I'll put a link down in the description. You can go ahead and check that out. So today, I'm just going to go over a few things that we really need to cover before even considering undertaking a swap. So I've got a list of stuff here just so I don't leave anything out. So I think we're going to have kind of 4 main points. So we'll just jump right into it. The first point, why? Why do you want to do a swap? Do you want more power? Do you want a customized Jeep that's different than pretty much any other Jeep on the road? Do you just happen to have a spare engine or a spare vehicle sitting around with a V8 in it or some kind of other engine that you don't know what to do with, so you figure you might as well throw it in the Jeep? Does it sound cool to you to say, I did an engine swap, I did a V8 swap, I put a V8 in a Jeep, my Jeep has a V8, something along those lines? Or is it just kind of for show? Do you want to show up somewhere, pop your hood, and have someone check out your engine and all this work you did? So you really got to figure out the reason why before you start the swap, because although it's not a terribly difficult swap, it isn't easy either, and it's probably going to cost more and take more effort than you initially imagined. So it's something that once you start, you got to be committed to, and you got to know why you're doing it so that it's worth putting the time in to do it. So along those lines, if you're just doing it for more power, I would suggest staying away from this swap. I would say go buy a different Jeep. If you have a 4-cylinder in your Jeep, like I did, go out and find a 6-cylinder Jeep. The cost difference between selling your 4-cylinder and buying a 6-cylinder is going to be cheaper than any engine swap you're going to do. So that's option 1. Option 2, if you really want a V8, go look at the Grand Cherokees. So the ZJ Grand Cherokee from 93 to 98, those all came with the option of a 5.2 liter V8, and 98 even had the option of a 5.9. So that's a good option as far as the Magnum engines go. If you want something a little newer, starting in 99, they produced the WJ model, and those you could get with a 4.7 liter V8. And these Grand Cherokees, they're all pretty much dirt cheap at this point, so if you sell your Wrangler and you decide you want to go get a Grand Cherokee, you're probably going to end up with cash in your pocket, and you'll have a V8 on top of that, so something to consider. It's also important to consider, other makes of vehicles as well. Jeep makes a great vehicle, no doubt about that, but other manufacturers do as well. So I would suggest looking at an FJ Cruiser if you have the funds for it. I drive an FJ Cruiser. You might be able to see it in the corner of the screen here. That's my daily driver. The V8's just kind of a weekend fun vehicle for me at this point. So the FJs, they're not cheap, but they do hold their value. And with my FJ, I'd say that it's probably got a similar amount of power as the 5.2 that I put in the Jeep with a V6. Toyota makes the Land Cruisers as well. Plenty of those had V8s in them. If you're looking for a V8, Toyota V6, like I said, those are pretty powerful. If you find one with a V6, like a 4Runner or Tacoma, those are pretty good options as well. There's plenty of aftermarket support and options in the off-road industry for the Tacomas, the 4Runners, the Land Cruisers, the FJs, and even the Nissan Xteras. That's another good option. Look into those as well, because those you can find a lot cheaper than the Toyotas, and they can be just as capable off-road as something like an FJ Cruiser. So it's important to look at options rather than saying I'm going to stick with this one vehicle and make it what I want. But personally, my reason for doing this, I've had this Jeep for quite a while. I'm the second owner. I got it just after I got out of high school, and it's been with me for many years, and I really don't want to get rid of it. So I guess just some sentimental crap that whatever is pretty much why I did the swap. So question 1 was why. Question 2 is what. What are we going to swap? Do we want a gas engine? Do we want a diesel engine? We hear a lot about LS swaps, LS this, LS that, which is just a GM small block gas engine, if you're not familiar. We hear a lot about just a generic diesel swap. I'll go put a diesel in it. do a diesel swap. You know, that's what you hear, and you don't really hear much beyond diesel swap. So really, when people are talking about diesel swaps, a lot of times they're talking about a Cummins engine. Cummins is pretty much the heavy hitter when it comes to diesel engines, and you don't hear too many bad things about them. So you have an option for a Cummins. You can put a Volkswagen diesel, you can put a Mercedes diesel. I really don't know much about those, but I'll go into the Cummins a little more. So up until about a year ago, what your options were for a Cummins engine, you could get a 4BT or a 6BT. So those are just a 4 cylinders, a 4BT, 6 cylinders, a 6BT diesel engines. The 6BT is what came in a lot of the Dodge Rams back in the 90s. And even up into the early 2000s, they had the 6BT in them. And those are decent donor vehicles, but in my opinion, that engine is far too large and far too heavy for a Wrangler. It's made to fit in a full-size truck. This is hardly a full-size truck. It's hardly even half of a full-size truck. And the engine alone, I think, weighs somewhere around 1,100 pounds. So finding springs that are going to carry that, reinforcing the frame as much as you need to carry something like that is just not worth it, in my opinion. Then we go to the 4BT. I want to say that it's somewhere around 800 pounds. If you guys know exact numbers, feel free to put them in the comments, but it's roughly around 800 pounds. So I mean, even that, I think, is a little heavy for this. And that's the engine alone, without the transmission, transfer case, or anything. The size is alright, but again, just the weight. But within the past year, Cummins introduced a new crate engine, and that's the R2.8. Now, if you're not familiar with it, just do a search here on YouTube. You can do even a Google search, and Cummins' website will come up. I think it's like $9 grand for this 2.8 liter 4-cylinder diesel, and that is an excellent option. If that had been out when I started this swap, I would have seriously considered it. I think that weighs in around 500 pounds, so significantly lighter than both the 4BT and the 6BT, especially the 6BT. And they basically designed a swap package with it, so you get pretty much everything you need to install it, aside from the exhaust and a few other minor things that you might need to pick up along the way. But you're not just buying an engine and all these other parts. And a lot of the criticisms I see for the R2.8 are that it is $9,000, and you can probably go find a 4BT for, I don't know, $1,000 to $2 grand, something like that. But the thing you got to keep in mind is, number one, it's a brand new engine, and I would imagine it comes with a warranty. So you really can't beat that versus some diesel engine with 200, 300,000 miles on it with unknown maintenance history. And I mean, that alone is a major selling point. And then on top of that, it comes with all the install stuff, all the stuff you need to install it. To me, that's really hard to beat. Like I said, I would have seriously considered that option before starting the V8 swap a few years ago, if it had been out at the time. And not to say that in the future, who knows what will happen. Maybe I'll put one in, but for now, I'm happy with the V8. So that more or less covers the diesel swaps. Now we're going to move on to gas engine swaps. So if you're running a 4-cylinder Wrangler right now and you want a little more power, by far the easiest solution is going to be to move on to a 6-cylinder. To swap in a 6-cylinder, if for some reason you don't want to get rid of your Jeep like I didn't. You can buy a 6-cylinder engine off of Craigslist or somewhere on the internet or wherever for a couple $100. You're going to need a new transmission to go with it, and a new. You really should buy the whole engine down through the transfer case, just for ease of swap. That's going to be the easiest option because you can buy all the parts right off the shelf that you need for the swap. So you can go down to your auto parts store, anything that you need, they're going to have or they're going to be able to get for you. So you're not going to need to do any custom work. It's just pretty much all going to be, aside from the motor mounts, you're going to have to cut your old motor mounts off and weld new motor mounts on. But other than that, it's going to be all bolt-on. That is going to be by far the easiest way to get a little more power if you don't want your 4-cylinder anymore. But that's a step I just kind of skipped and went straight to the V8. So in terms of V8s, one of the more popular swaps, like I said before, are the LS swaps. small block Chevys. You hear a lot about 350s, which is a 5.7 liter V8, and really the LS series motors. Got the 6.0 LS2. Those are pretty popular. Small block Fords. A 302, a 351. Ford came out with their new Coyote motor a couple years ago. Those sound like pretty good power numbers that puts out. And then we have the Dodge, the Mopar Chrysler series, which pretty much is going to be the Magnum, like I put in this Jeep. So that's your 5.2 liter and your 5.9 liter, otherwise known as a 318 and a 360, respectively, or a Hemi engine. So those are kind of your options in a nutshell. There are obviously more, but those are the more popular ones. So I would say that I generally prefer to keep it in the same family, because even though the engines and everything weren't necessarily developed by the same engineers, if you buy an engine made by the same manufacturer, so Chrysler in this case, it's likely going to use a lot of the same connectors, a lot of the same wiring patterns, a lot of the same sensors, and a lot of things are going to play nicer between the Jeep and the new engine than they would if you went with something like a Chevy or a Ford. For simplicity's sake, my preference is when doing an engine swap to keep it within the same family. So same thing, if this was like a Camaro, I would be looking to go with a Chevy engine rather than a Dodge or a Ford. So it's just kind of along those lines. So this essentially leaves us with a choice between a Magnum and a Hemi. And beyond that, it kind of comes down to what year your Jeep is and how much you're willing to spend. So the Magnum engines and donor vehicles can be had extremely cheap these days, especially if you live in the northeastern part of the United States or in Canada. You can buy a rusted out Durango, Dakota, a Ram with a 5.2 or 5.9 in it for dirt cheap, just because it's not worth fixing the vehicle and people just sell them for parts because they're so rusted out. So that's what I ended up doing. I bought a Dodge Durango with a 5.2 liter V8 and automatic transmission with just over 100,000 miles for $300. The thing ran great, moved fine. It was just totally rusted out. So it's definitely a viable option for getting a cheap swap done if you live up in the north. And I've even read reports on the internet of people claiming that they made money on these swaps because they bought a whole donor parts vehicle, and they took the engine, transmission, everything they need, and they parted the rest of it out and sold their original drivetrain from the Jeep and had a net positive when the swap was all said and done. That wasn't my case, but I would think it's certainly possible to do. So that's something to keep in mind. Like I said, if you're going to do a Magnum swap, the vehicles to look for are going to be a Dodge Ram, Dodge Durango, Dodge Dakota, and a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Those all have the Magnum engines in them from the factory. As far as a Hemi goes, I didn't look a whole lot into the Hemis because they're so expensive to acquire. And that was really never on my radar to begin with, because we start running into compatibility issues with computers from year to year. There was a computer communication style that Chrysler used up until a certain point, and then they switched over to another one. I have the old version on here, and all the Hemis are the new version, and it just gets a little bit tougher to make things play nicely once you start mixing those two together. So as far as that goes, if you check out hotwireauto.com, they have this nice chart that shows what year Jeeps had what style computer system and what year donor vehicles had what style computer system. So the two systems being PCI and a CCD, as you can see on the top of the page. So the best thing to do is to find what your Jeep has, and then go look at what options there are as far as that computer system goes for donor vehicles and donor engines. Alright, so this is getting to be a very long video. So we're going to get on to point number, hands are a little frozen, we're going to get into point number 3 now. So now that we've chosen a Magnum engine, which is pretty much the most cost-effective engine to install at this point, we need to make a decision. Are we going to choose the 5.2 liter or the 5.9 liter? Because it came in both varieties. These are essentially the same engine, but they have a different displacement. So they're the same size, the same relative weight. They take all the same accessories. Everything on the outside is pretty much the same, but the 5.9 has a larger displacement than the 5.2. So you're going to get more power, more torque out of the 5.9 than you will out of the 5.2. The 5.2 is generally more available, and you can get them a little cheaper sometimes than the 5.9. So that's definitely something to consider. And if you put a 5.2 in and change your mind, you can pull that out and put a 5.9 in. It will bolt right up just in its place, in the place of the 5.2, and everything will be exactly the same. So I wouldn't necessarily say, I'm not going to do the swap until I find this specific engine. If you're having a hard time finding either a 5.2 or 5.9, just go ahead and put one in. I don't think you'd be disappointed either way. And it's easy enough to just swap out once everything's done, once all the hard work's done, which is lining up the motor mounts, building the exhaust, building the transmission mount, figuring out drive shaft sizes, and the list goes on. So simply pulling out one engine and putting another in is just a piece of cake after you've done all that. So that's about it on engine sizes. Now the next thing we need to think about is, do we want to go with an automatic or a manual transmission? It's probably going to be easiest to go with a manual setup, just because the automatic involves more wiring than the manual does. It kind of depends on what your Jeep's already set up with. If you already have an automatic, then it won't be so bad to go with an automatic on the new V8, because you've already got the single brake pedal. You don't have the clutch hydraulic system. There's just a few things that will make it a little easier to stick with the same thing. It's doable either way. I went from a manual to an automatic just because I wanted the drivability of an automatic, and an automatic is far superior off-road than a manual is. Manual is more fun to drive, I will admit, but I think for my application, an automatic was the right choice. So, like I said, it does involve more wiring, and if you're going from a manual to an automatic, there are more parts that you're going to need to get. You're going to need to get rid of your clutch pedal, get rid of the clutch system. You're going to need to get a shifter, a shift cable. Like I said, very doable, but there are a few more things to think about with that. Beyond that, it kind of depends on what you buy the V8 with as well. Does your donor engine already have an automatic on it? Does it already have a manual on it? With the 5.2, you can just switch the flex plate with a flywheel if you're going from an automatic to a manual, or vice versa if you're going the other way. With the 5.9 liter, it can be a little bit more complex than that, but as long as you know that, it won't be an issue. The 5.2 is internally balanced, and the 5.9 is externally balanced, meaning that you need specific harmonic balancer in the front and a specific flywheel or flex plate in the rear of the engine in order to not have the thing vibrating around once you get up past a certain RPM. So as long as you know that you need those things, the 5.9 is no problem to pick up and put in and swap pieces around on. But just know that you can't swap the flex plate and the flywheel between a 5.2 and a 5.9. Same with the harmonic balancer without having issues. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. The parts are readily available. I wouldn't really let that be a concern, but just something to know. In terms of the rest of the drivetrain with the Magnum swap, the transfer case and the axles, the stock Jeeps come with an MP231 transfer case, and I've seen plenty of people have kept that transfer case and had no problem with the power of the V8 on it. There is an option to do an MP231 HD conversion. So let's say you buy a parts vehicle, you get a parts Dodge Ram or a parts Dodge Durango. Those also have an MP231 transfer case, the same as the Jeep. Well, the same model number as the Jeep, but it's a beefed up version. So you can pull parts out of that, combine them with the Jeep transfer case and make yourself a heavy-duty transfer case. And that will be free if you already have a parts vehicle. So that's one option. Another option is to get an NV241 out of a Rubicon. So the Jeep Wrangler TJ Rubicons came with a stronger transfer case, which is the NV241, which was actually used in a lot of full-size trucks, like the Chevy Silverados and other things like that. That's a pretty strong transfer case. And the Jeep ones actually had a 4-to-1 low range, which is pretty sweet if you get doing some off-road stuff. One more note on the stock transfer case that's in these Jeeps. If you have a 6-cylinder setup right now and you're going through the V8, you can use the same transfer case. But if you have a 4-cylinder setup and you're going to either anything else, a 6-cylinder or a V8, you're going to need to do some modifications to it, or just find a different transfer case. Because both the 6-cylinder Wranglers and the Dodge V8 transmission use a 23 spline input shaft. So that's what mates between the transfer case and the transmission, where the 4-cylinder use a 21 spline. So you can buy a different input shaft and install it in the transfer case, but it's probably going to be easier just to go out and find another transfer case. The NP231s with a 23 spline input that you need for the V8, you can find those for $100 or less, at least in the area where I live. So really not a big deal. And I'm sure the old 4-cylinder one could probably be sold for a similar price to that. And the differentials. The front axle, Dana 30, comes stock in all the TJs other than the Rubicons, which come with the Dana 44. Dana 44. So it's a weak version of a Dana 44, but won't get into that. So the Dana 30 seems to hold up fine to the power of these V8s. If you want to strengthen it up a little bit, you can get a Dana 30 out of a XJ Cherokee, late 90s Cherokee, and those have what they call a high pinion differential, whereas the TJs have a low pinion. And the high pinion differential has a little bit of a strength advantage over the low pinion, and plus the high pinion gets the drive shaft up higher, so it gets it out of the rocks if you're doing some crawling. So that's one option there, but the Dana 30 that's in the Jeep should hold up just fine as long as you're not doing anything stupid with it. Most Jeeps come stock with a Dana 35 rear axle, and I would not advise using that with the V8. It's pretty likely to break. So I actually grenaded the inside of a Dana 35 with the 4-cylinder that was in this Jeep before. So I would not recommend running those with a V8 installed. So in terms of axle options, your easiest and cheapest one is probably going to be to go find a Dana 44 out of a Jeep Wrangler, already out of a TJ. All the LJ, the unlimited TJs, came with the Dana 44 rear, and as those are getting older, they're starting to be pulled out as the Jeeps are crashed or hit high mileage or whatever, and they're floating around a little more than they used to. And pricing in my area, you can probably find one of those for $300-400 if you look hard enough. A lot of people like to ask $1,000, but those are the ones that just sit on them and they don't sell. So the one that I have in this Jeep right here has 3.73 gears, and I think I paid, what did I pay? I paid $250 for it, I think. And I have another Dana 44 just kind of sitting around as a spare that I paid $400 for. So, you know, the one that I paid $400 for had a limited slip in it, and that was 373 gears as well. The one that I have in this Jeep is open because I would eventually like to put in an ARB locker, but that'll be later on down the road. So, I mean, other options you can. A popular swap for these Jeeps is to pull a Ford 8.8 out of a Ford Explorer and swap that in. They got bracket kits that can go on it and everything else, but with the bracket kits and all the welding and everything, you're better off trying to find a cheap Dana 44 because it's, in my opinion, is a much better axle. So, but that's just my opinion. So that's it on drivetrain. Now we're going to move on to point number 4, which is legality and due diligence. So, is your swap going to be legal? In the U.S., all donor engines are legally required to be from the same model year or newer than the vehicle that they're being installed into. I don't know what the laws are for Canada and any other countries, but in the United States, that's what we need to go by. Then you need to consider what hoops are you going to have to jump through to get your swap approved. The requirements can vary largely by state, by county, by metropolitan area, at least in the U.S. So really need to do due diligence, do the research, figure out what's legal, what's not, what you're going to have to do, which parts you're going to have to use in order to make it a legal swap before you even get started. So, California, I would say, has the most strict laws. They have smog inspections every 2 years, I believe. So they'll actually go in, they'll check all the stamping, casting numbers on the engine block, on the transmission to make sure they're compatible with each other for the year vehicle that they're installed in. I believe in California you need to run the stock exhaust manifolds from whatever vehicle the engine came off of rather than going with aftermarket headers. The list goes on. And as I understand it, a lot of largely populated areas, big cities are starting to adopt the same system that California uses, or at least a similar system, just to keep pollution down and smog down. So it's it really depends on where you live, because if you live somewhere like Michigan, there are no inspections whatsoever there. You can do whatever you want to your vehicle, nobody will care. So it really depends where you live. So just really do your homework and figure out what needs to be done before even buying a single part for this swap. It is doable pretty much everywhere. I don't think there's anywhere that it's illegal to actually swap your engine. So it really just comes down to what hoops you're going to have to jump through to please the system. So, but that's about all I've got for now. If anyone has any points they'd like to add or anything that they'd like to discuss, go ahead down to the comments section and post it down there. There's plenty more that I could have covered that I didn't, but I think these are really the basics that need to be discussed to get started with one of these swaps. It's just do your research is all I have to say. I'll also put the link for the Hotwire Auto website down in the description, so you can go check that out to see compatibility of Jeep versus donor vehicle year for year, computer-wise. So that'll be down there as well, along with, like I said, the previous video to this will be linked down there. And once I get the next video produced for this, I'll probably put the link down there as well for that. Just so you can follow along from video to video. Yeah, if I haven't managed to talk you out of doing an engine swap, stick around and we'll have more content for you. Thanks for watching.